These friends fed me a lovely, fantastic turkey dinner, gravy and potatoes. I still remember it. But by the time I got back to hospital, my bowels had rebelled, and I knew there was something nasty coming out. So friends took me back into hospital on Monday. Staff, two of them lifted me into bed, and my bowels just exploded, and I was full of it. But fortunately, the staff who were on that weekend were very kind. We laughed our way through it, and cleaning me up and getting me all set up for bed and all that. So things like that. The most humiliating moments for me were when my bowel and bladder went out of turn. It just felt the bottom line, the bottom of losing independence was to lose control over one's pissing and shitting. So when it happened, it just knocked me out, and if my helpers were good around it, that picked me up and kept me going. I also spent a lot of time down in the bowels of the hospital pushing my chair, which it took me about 3 months of learning how to sit upright in a chair before I could even sit and push my manual chair 100 yards. My neck was so wobbly and sore, and I remember them taking about 6 weeks to go from a prone position to upright with the halo on, and I got it off after 6 weeks and went to a hard collar, plastic, and then a soft collar. Just gradually, bit by bit, getting stronger and learning how to exercise my wrists and learning this tenodesis. And the best thing I could do at the time was an IBM Selectric was sort of the top of the line computer in the 70s. And my sister, who worked in a law office, sent me down a used one, which I got set up in the occupational therapy, and she made splints for me. And I was able to write, so I've got pages of writing, typing, that I did during that in hospital and for the next year or two out of hospital before computers came along. And the reason that was so important to me was because nobody could know. I could write something and nobody knew I was disabled. It was the only thing I could do that didn't show that I was an injured man. So after 7 months there, a number of us started to realize this rehab unit, which was been built in 1976, it was only 3 years old, was state of the art, but it was full of these mistakes for people with spinal cord injury. For instance, that drawers, there were no handles on it. Well, how does someone with fingers like this pull the drawer open? I couldn't. You're right in my own bedroom on a rehab ward, no handles. The door getting into the bathroom was about 1 inch wider than the chairs. So I would knock the door and poke it and all kinds of things. The sink was too high, and light switches too high, too far away, the heaters, the air conditioning blowing right down on us. I'd get these cold sweats, and this thing would be blowing. They taped all the vents, the air conditioning vents in the rehab unit, because it blew down on all of us, and we froze. So what we did is we put together a list of these items, and we sent them to the administrator of the hospital. One of the staff, the voc rehab, vocational rehabilitation counselor, he encouraged us to do this. So that's what we did, signed by 7 or 8 of us. Well, within a month, 3 weeks, a month of that letter being sent, we were all discharged, some into the community, and a few of us over to St. Mary's. So that's how I got out of the general. Then 4 months at St. Mary's, and I was ready to leave. And fortunately, I had met a woman named Susan, and actually Helen and I had met her in 1976. She was an old friend of Jim's when they had been teachers together in Toronto. She came to visit him for a few days. We met her there because we were living with him. And then I met her again in 1979. In between, she had gone to teach in Nigeria with CUSO. So when she came back, Jim had met someone else. And she was quite angry about that. But she also knew I had been in hospital, so I was in hospital. So she came in, and we got to know each other in kind of an interesting way. She would come in and vent for a while about Jim, because I knew him, and she could blast off at him, her feelings. But then she would also, see what was going on with me, and let me share some of my troubles, and she helped me out. She was my hands when she was there, and we got to be quite good friends, and, to the point where she helped me get out of hospital. Because I'd been a social worker in my previous life, I knew the programs, government programs available to help people with disabilities get back into the community. So I contacted the vocational rehabilitation office in Kingston, got connected with a good worker there, and we made a plan that I would hire Susan for 5 hours a day to do my personal care. And I needed lots of care then, and I still do. I needed help with my dressing, with food prep, getting things organized, emptying my leg bag, my bowel bladder care, all those kinds of things, washing me. But I've been doing that for, well, 29 years now. So that program, with the assistance of the program, I was able to hire Susan, and we moved back to a little village called Athens, about 10 miles north of Brockville. 1,000 people. Used to be called Farmersville at the turn of the century, but they thought they'd get more students coming to their high school if they changed the name, so they changed it to Athens. Seat of learning. So we lived in an old red brick house that was perfect, because the old farmhouses they're good for wheelchairs. Big wide doors and nice old floors, big rooms and big windows. So we lived there for a year in Athens while I learned to sit up in my wheelchair basically and push around. And learning to go back into the community in a wheelchair was one of the most terrifying experiences anyone who has an injury like this goes through, because it's easy in hospital. Everything is made for, well, maybe the drawers have handles on them now, but ideally things are made for people in chairs because of this situation, the nature of the place. But I remember my friends coming to visit me in September. My injury had been in June, so 3 months later, coming to visit me in September, and they took me outside in my manual chair, which I could push a few hundred feet in the hospital. But we took me outside, and we had to go down this ramp at the emergency. You might know Kingston General, there's a big ramp, so they took me down this ramp. I was terrified, going to fall. They let go. You know, I'd shoot across that road and die. Somebody hit me, out in the road there. So they got down there, and I felt every bump. It felt like another mountain going down the side of it. Got onto the sidewalk, again, bumps every 3 feet. We went over to City Park, bumps everywhere, going over to gravel roads. Everything was like just magnified. It was horrible. I thought, this is going to be impossible for me to move around in this manual chair. Well, it was very difficult because I, don't have a lot of strength. I never did get much back, even though I tried. The burning seemed to prevent it. But over that year in Athens, I learned to push around the whole village. Got used, more or less, to being in a wheelchair. I started working for my friend Chuck at a wood stove store there on the vocational rehab program, and basically I was a clerk. People come in, I'd tell them about the stoves, sort of watch over the books. But Chuck was new into business. The books weren't very many, and they were kind of disorganized, and I was totally new at being in a wheelchair and had no idea of accounting, so that was a fly-by-night operation. And I was on Valium at the time for pain management. Well, the pain was pretty severe. I was up to 30 milligrams of Valium, and I was slurring my words. I was talking like I was drunk, and I realized I can't do this. So I stopped working at the store, and I cut back on my Valium to 20 milligrams, and eventually I got off of it altogether. So I don't use any Valium now. But it was a very difficult time in Athens. My friends were around a lot, so that was good. But again, I had no identity that I felt safe or comfortable with. This burning was driving me crazy. I didn't know what I was going to do in terms of jobs and the rest of my life. So I was getting and moving, pushing in a chair. I could do it a little bit, but I couldn't really do much. So I just was getting quite depressed. Well, what do you do when you're a depressed social worker? You get a job working with people who might be even more depressed. So
put your heart in every day. Every They say you learn a lesson every day.